He pours coffee for a living, I said, loud enough for the whole counter to hear, and I laughed the way you laugh when you already know you have won. The man behind the counter did not flinch. He set a chipped white cup in front of an old laborer 2 stools down, slid a folded napkin under it so the saucer would not rock on the warped wood, and said, "Creams by your left hand, David." Then he looked at me. Not the way a servant looks at a prince, the way a man looks at weather he has decided to walk through. I had crossed 40 light years to find my sister living above a roadside cantina on a dust planet I could not have located on a chart, and the first thing I learned about the human she had married was that he remembered an old worker's name and could not be made to feel small. My name is Velkar Duran Sale, and at that moment I was the crown brother of the House of Sale, eighth in the line of the Oraline throne, sent across the dark by my mother the Empress to drag my sister Lizen home before her foolishness became a scandal the court could not survive. I had practiced the contempt on the voyage. I had a speech. The speech began with that line about the coffee. Lizen came out from the back with a tray balanced on her forearm, and the sight of her stopped my speech in my throat. My sister, the radiant of Sale, whose betrothal had been promised to 3 sovereign houses before she could walk. She wore a plain apron stained at the hem. Her silver-violet hair, which had once taken 4 attendants an hour to dress, was tied back with a strip of leather. There was flour on her wrist. "Velkar," she said, not surprised. She had felt me coming the way our blood always feels its own. "Sit down. You look like you've been holding that sentence since the orbital ring." "I have," I said. "Then you can put it down. Coffee, Ren." That last to the man, easy, without looking, the way you speak to someone who is part of the room you live in. The man, Ren, was already pouring. He was older than I expected. The dossier my mother's agents had assembled called him a human male, unranked, late 30s, and had attached one blurred image of a back turned to a market stall. In person, there was gray starting at his temples and a scar that ran from the corner of his jaw down into his collar, pale and old. His hands were broad, and there were burns on the backs of them, healed flat, the kind you get from machines and not from kitchens. He set a cup in front of me. The coffee was very good. I did not want it to be. "You came a long way to insult me," Ren said. There was no heat in it. "Most people manage it over the comm. I came for my sister. She's right here." He wiped the counter where my cup had been. "Nobody's keeping her. You don't understand what she is." "I understand exactly what she is." He looked at Lizen, and something passed between them that I had no name for, that I had never once seen on the face of any man my sister had been promised to. "She's the woman who fixes the cantina's water reclaimer when it dies at 3 in the morning so the night crew has something to drink. The rest is your business, not mine." I should tell you that I had expected to despise him in an instant and be done. Instead, I sat there in a cantina that smelled of scorched grain and engine oil, on a planet whose name I kept forgetting, and I felt the first thin crack run through the speech I had carried across the dark. But a crack is not a collapse. I am Sale. We do not collapse over coffee. I drank and I set the cup down and I began the work I had been sent to do. "Mother is dying," I said. I had meant to save that. I had meant to deploy it like a blade at the end, when she was softened. But Ren's calm had unsettled me, and I wanted to see them both flinch, and so I spent it early. Lizen went still. The tray came down on the counter without a sound. "How long?" "A season. Perhaps 2. The court physicians lie about the rest." I leaned in. "The succession is open, Lizen. Open. You are the Radiant. Your blood claim is second only to mine, and mine is contested by the Vorum faction, who would put a regent on the throne and bleed the Reach for a generation. If you come home, if you stand in the hall and let them see you, the houses fall in behind Sale and the Reach holds. If you stay here, pouring coffee, I let the word land. The throne goes to men who will turn the outer worlds into a quarry." It was true. All of it was true. That is the cruelty of the thing I did. I did not have to lie. The weight I set on my sister's shoulders was real. She looked at the man. He had stopped wiping the counter. "Is it true?" Ren asked me. "Not her, me. All of it, every word." He nodded slowly, as if I had told him the price of grain. Then he turned to Lizen and said, "Then we should listen to the rest of it before either of us decides anything." And that, I would understand much later, was the moment I lost. Not at the end, in the great hall, with the houses on their knees. At a warped counter on a dust world, when a man I had crossed the dark to mock declined to be afraid of me, and chose instead to be useful to the woman he loved. But I am getting ahead of myself. The cantina was called the Long Drink, and it sat at the lip of a freight road where ore haulers stopped to take on water, and the drivers took on something stronger. Lizen had been there 19 months. I learned this slowly over the 3 days my ship's hold needed to recharge its jump coils, days I had not budgeted to spend in the company of the very people I had come to extract her from. The first night I slept in a rented room above the cantina, on a mattress that smelled of someone else's life, and I lay awake composing the report I would send my mother. The human is beneath notice. The girl is shamed but salvageable. Bring the warship. Sever the marriage, restore the line. In the court of sale, a marriage to an unranked alien could be set aside by imperial decree as one sets aside clerical error. I drafted the decree in my head 3 times before dawn. In the morning I came down and the man was already there, of course. He was always already there. He had the front grate up and the ovens lit, and he was turning the eggs of some 6-legged ground bird in a black pan. And Lisanne was wiping down the long windows that faced the freight road, and the two of them were not speaking, and it was the most married thing I had ever seen. You don't have servants, I said. I meant it as an accusation. We have each other, Lisanne said. And Davin when his back's good. You are the radiant of sale, not here. She did not turn from the window. Here I'm Lice. The woman who runs the long drink with her husband and burns the first batch of cakes every morning. Because she can't stop talking when she should be watching the oven. You never burned anything in your life. You never had to. I burn things now. And there was such a quiet pleasure in the way she said it that I had to look away. A hauler driver came in, a broad alien of the quorum caste, plated gray and rank proud, the kind who in the old days would have spat at a human and called it manners. He sat heavily and he barked his order at Ren the way you bark at a thing, not a man, black, no skin on it, and don't water it like last time. And I watched, because I wanted to see the human put in his place by someone other than me. Ren poured the coffee. He set it down. He said, "Skim the oil off myself this morning. You'll taste it." And the quorum grunted and tasted it, and his rank-proud plate settled, and he said nothing more because there was nothing to say. The coffee was right. The man had made it right on purpose for someone who had insulted him, because that was the work, and the work was honest. Micro by micro, against my will, the cracks were spread. But I am Sael. I went looking for the lever. Every man has a lever. My mother taught me that before I could read the court hands. Find the thing a man fears or wants or hides, and you do not have to fight him. You simply move the lever and he moves himself. So on the second day, while Lisanne was at the depot trading for flour, I sat across from the human at the empty counter in the dead hour of the afternoon, and I went looking. You were a soldier, I said. The burns, the way he stood with his weight already balanced always, even half asleep over a pan. I was a lot of things. A soldier, though. He poured himself coffee, which he had not done all morning for himself, and he wrapped both burned hands around the cup. Long time ago, different sky. Did you tell her what you were? She didn't ask. She asked what I am. He drank. Different question. And what are you? A man who pours coffee for a living. He said it back to me, my own line. My whole speech, handed back across the counter without a single barb on it, and he almost smiled. You should try it. It's harder than the throne. Nobody bows. You find out fast whether anyone likes you. I hated him then, cleanly, the way you hate a locked door. And because I could not find the lever, I decided to make one. That night, I sent the message to my ship's captain, on a private band, in the old battle cipher of the house guard that no cantina on a freight road could possibly intercept. Bring her down to the surface, the Vorum contender. Bring Kale Vorum and his binding suit and his witnesses, and bring them here to this dust, to this counter. I will give my sister a choice she cannot refuse. A true match of imperial blood, a contender who can hold the throne beside her, or the human who pours coffee. Let her choose in front of witnesses. Let her see the size of what she is throwing away. The girl is sentimental, but she is not a fool. Faced with the man and the throne, she will choose the throne, and the human will let her, because he is exactly decent enough to. It was, I thought, a masterstroke. I had built a trap out of my sister's own goodness and the human's own decency, and I would close it in front of an audience, and I would carry her home. I slept well that night. The last clean sleep I would have for a long while. I did not understand yet what I had actually summoned. I did not understand that there are some men you do not want standing up in a small room. I thought I was bringing a rival to humiliate a coffee pourer. I was bringing witnesses to a recognition I had spent my whole life refusing to make. I was not the first the throne had sent. I learned this on the second morning when a hauler driver named Sepha, a lean, gray-skinned woman who ran ore between the depot and the orbital ring, leaned across the counter and asked, Ren, with the easy malice of someone making conversation, "Is this the brother then, or another buyer?" And when I asked her what she meant by buyer, she laughed and told me. My mother had not waited for me. Of course she had not. The Empress of the Reach does not stake the succession on one sun crossing the dark. She sends 3 approaches and lets them race. Before my launch had even cleared the home system, agents of the throne had already found the long drink. Quieter than me, subtler than me, men and women with soft voices and contract cases. And they had come to the dust world to do with money and law what I had come to do with contempt. The first had offered Ren a fortune to dissolve the marriage. Simply that. A number that would have bought the whole freight road and every cantina on it. Ren had poured the man a coffee, listened to the offer all the way through, and then said, "She's not for sale, and neither am I, and your coffee's getting cold." The agent had doubled the number. Ren had warmed the cup. The second had come with law instead of gold, a writ of imperial interest, the kind of document that can void a commoner's marriage the way you void a clerical error, and a pair of court enforcers to make the writ feel heavy. Sepha had been in the cantina that day. She told it with relish. The enforcers had laid the writ on the counter and told the human to thumb it or be removed, and Ren had read it, slowly, all the way through. And then he had set it down and said, "This says the throne has an interest in my wife. I'll grant the throne its interest. I've got an interest too. Mine's older than the throne's, and it doesn't need a stamp." And when the enforcers reached for him, the whole cantina had stood up. Not for the war saint, none of them knew then what he was. For the coffee man, for the man who'd gone down the reclaimer's shaft twice. Davin had stood, bad back and all. The quorum driver had stood, rank proud and scowling. Sepha had stood. A freight road full of nobodies had put themselves between two imperial enforcers and the man who poured their coffee. And the enforcers had looked at the room and done the arithmetic and taken their writ back up the gravity well unthumbed. "That's when we knew he was somebody," Sepha said, "even before this week. Not because of what he'd done, because of what he wouldn't do. A man doesn't turn down that much money and that much law over a waitress, unless the waitress is the realest thing in his life. We didn't know she was a princess. We knew she was that." She drained her cup. "Your throne keeps sending its best to break them, brother. It keeps sending its best home empty. You're the third. You laughed louder than the other two. I'll give you that. Didn't get you any further." I sat with that for a long while after she left. Two approaches before me. Gold and law, the throne's two strongest instruments. The very tools I had been raised to wield, and both had broken against a man pouring coffee, not because he fought them, but because he simply would not be moved, and the people around him would not let him be moved, and that immovability had a gravity of its own that no number and no writ could overcome. And I, the crown brother, the cleverest of the three, had arrived believing I would succeed where gold and law had failed, with contempt, with a sentence about coffee. I had thought myself the sharpest blade in the throne's hand. I was only the third dull edge, sent to scrape at a thing that could not be scraped. I went looking for Lizen to ask her why she had never told me any of this. I found her in the cellar under the cantina, on her back beneath the water reclaimer, her silver violet hair full of grease, a wrench in her hand, and a part the size of my fist held in her teeth while she worked both hands inside the machine. "You knew Mother sent agents," I said. "Gold, a writ, enforcers." She did not stop working. "Tell Ren the seal ring on the third coupling's gone again. He'll want to know." She fitted the part, tightened it, and slid out from under the machine, and looked up at me from the cellar floor, grease-streaked, sovereign, entirely at home. Of course I knew. I sent them home. Did you think I'd let the throne dissolve my marriage from across the dark and not feel it coming? I'm the radiant of Sail, Velkar. I felt every one of them the way I felt you. 3 jumps out, like a change in the weather. Then why didn't you run? Hide deeper? Because I'm done running. She wiped her hands on a rag that did nothing. I ran 19 months ago. I ran from a throne I was going to be married off of like a treaty clause, to a man chosen for his bloodline by a court that had never once asked what I wanted. I ran, and I landed here, and I stopped. This is where I stopped, Velkar. I'm not running anymore. If the throne wants to break what I built when I stopped running, the throne can come down here and look me in the eye and try. It keeps not trying. It keeps sending instruments. She climbed the cellar stairs past me. You're the last instrument, brother. After you, there's only Mother herself, and Mother can't make the climb. So really, you're the end of it. Whatever you decide is whatever the throne decides. I'd think hard about that if I were you. You're not here to fetch me. You're here to find out what the throne actually is, now that it's down to its last and cleverest blade, standing in a cellar that smells of reclaimer grease, with nothing left to say. She went up. I stood in the cellar a long time, with the machine ticking and the smell of grease, and I understood that the trap I thought I was building had walls older than mine, and that I had walked into the heart of it the moment I laughed. Kale Vorum came down on the 3rd day, in a launch that scorched the freight road and brought every hauler driver out to stare. He arrived the way I had once arrived everywhere, sheathed in the certainty of rank, flanked by 2 binding witnesses in the violet sashes of the contract court, his own armor chased in the gray and gold of his house. He was younger than me, taller, beautiful in the cold way the Vorum breed for. He stepped through the front grate of the long drink and looked at the warped counter and the scorched grain smell and the chipped white cups, and his lip curled, and I felt a flush of satisfaction because that curl was the whole plan. Let him sneer. Let the room watch a true contender sneer at the place my sister had lowered herself to, and then let her choose. "This is where she's been hiding," Kale said, the radiant of Sail ladling soup. Pouring coffee, Ren said from behind the counter. Soup's only on cold nights. The witnesses turned to look at the human who had spoken to a Vorum contender as if they shared a profession. Kale did not even turn. To him, the voice had come from furniture. You may serve us, Kale told the counter, and then you may leave, while your betters discuss the future of an empire. And here is the thing I want you to understand, because it is the hinge of everything that came after. Ren did not bristle. He did not square up. He poured 4 coffees, 1 for Kale, 2 for the witnesses. 1 he set at the empty stool where he expected Lizen to sit, and he set them down with the same care he gave the old laborer Davin every morning, and he said, "On the house. You came a long way." And then he stepped back and folded his burned hands and waited, calm as a wall. I had wanted him humiliated. Instead, I was watching a contender of the Vorum try to land blows on Fog. Lizen came out from the back. She had taken off the apron. She had not, I noticed, changed anything else. The leather strip still in her hair, the flowers still on her wrist, and she stood beside her husband, not in front of him and not behind him, and she said, "Kale, you've grown into your father's face. I'm sorry for that." A witness coughed. "Radiant," Kale said, and he bowed, exactly as deep as protocol required and not a finger lower. "I've come to bring you home, and to offer what your brother no doubt explained, a true match. House Vorum and House Sale joined, the throne held, the reach unbroken. I'll not pretend it's love. I'll pretend nothing. It's a throne, Lizen, and you were born to it, and you are wasting it," he gestured. A slow, disdainful sweep, at the cantina, at the haulers, at the man. "On this," Lizen repeated, "on a human who pours coffee. I waited for my trap to close. I had built it to close right here. The contender, the throne, the witnesses, the choice laid bare. I had been so sure she would weep and waver, and that Ren, decent, self-effacing Ren, would tell her to go, would free her with his own mouth, and that I would carry her home having lost nothing but a season." Lizen looked at me first, not at Kale, at me, and in her eyes was something I had not earned and did not deserve, which was pity. "You still don't see him," she said. "After 3 days, you watched him work, and you still see a man who pours coffee." "I see a man who pours coffee," I said, "because that is what he does." "Tell them what you did before, Ren," she said quietly. "Just this once, not for them. For my brother, who came across the dark to save me and can't understand why I don't need saving." Ren was silent for a long moment. The ovens ticked. A hauler engine idled out on the road. "I'd rather not," he said. "I know." Her voice was very gentle. "I know you'd rather not. You've never once told it to make a man kneel. But there are 2 binding witnesses standing in our cantina, and they are going to write down whatever happens here, and it's going to reach the Hall of Sale whether we like it or not. So let's make sure they write the truth." And one of the binding witnesses, the older one, a thin, gray-skinned woman with the eyes of someone who has recorded a great many lies and is tired of it, went very still. She had been looking at Ren's hands, at the burns, at the way they were burned, and I saw her file something away in whatever cold archive lives behind a witness's eyes. Kale laughed. "By all means, let the coffee man tell us his war stories." He sat. He sipped the coffee Ren had poured him, and his face did the thing the rank-proud quorum driver's face had done. Settled despite itself because the coffee was right. He hated that it was right. I watched him hate it. "My brother says mother is dying," Lizen said to Ren, ignoring Kale entirely now. "He says the Vorum will take the throne and quarry the outer worlds. He says I have to choose, the contender or you. He built me a choice." She put her flour-dusted hand flat on the counter. "So choose with me, tell them who you are. And then we'll decide what we owe my mother's empire together, the way we decide everything. At 3 in the morning, over the water reclaimer, like the people we actually are. I will tell you that I had spent 40 light years and a great deal of my mother's gold to engineer this exact moment, and that it was unfolding precisely as I signed it, the contender and the human and the choice, and that I had never in my life been more certain that I had miscalculated something enormous." Ren unwrapped his hands from the cup. "There's not much to tell," he said. "I'll tell it short." He looked at the older witness, the gray-skinned woman, because somehow he had clocked her the way I had clocked her, the one in the room who already half knew. "You've seen burns like these. Once," she said. Her voice had gone careful, "on a man pulled out of a reactor breach. Plasma flash. It comes off the hands when you hold a containment seal shut by force longer than the seal is rated for. That's where I got them," Ren said. "There was only one man," the witness said slowly, "who held the Sale flagship's containment shut at the Battle of the Ember Gate. Held it 40 seconds past failure so 1,100 crew could reach the boats. The records say he died at the seal." The cantina was very quiet now. "The records are wrong," Ren said. "I'll grant you it was close." Kale had stopped sipping his coffee. "Now I want to be honest with you, because I have not been honest with much in this account. I knew the name. Every child of Sale knew the name. The man who held the Ember Gate was a story my mother told at the long table on the night she wanted us brave. A human, one of the auxiliaries, unranked, who when the sail flagship took the breach that should have cracked it open, had wedged himself into the containment throat and held the seal with his own body in a manual override and would not let go until the last boat cleared, and who was given posthumously the only thing the throne of sail can give a foreigner, the ember right, the standing of a sworn shield of the house, recorded in the roll of the saved, never to be revoked. We were told he died. The whole reach was told he died. It made a cleaner story. A living human war hero is a political problem. A dead one is a saint. His name in the roll was Corin Renvale. I looked at the man pouring coffee on a dust world, and I felt the floor of 40 light years drop out from under me. "You're dead," I said. It was the only thing in my head. "I let them think so," Ren said. "It was easier. There's a kind of life they had planned for the man who held the Ember Gate, and it was all halls and medals and standing behind your mother looking grim. I'd had enough of halls." He looked at Lizen, and the war hero went out of his face, and the man came back into it. "And then she walked into a cantina on a freight road, hiding from a throne, and I figured a man hiding from a hall and a woman hiding from a throne might have something to say to each other." "You never told me your name was in the roll," Lizen said. Soft, not hurt. Wondering. "You never told me yours was on the throne," he said. "We were both just trying to be the other thing. Took us a while to admit it, and the older binding witness, the gray-skinned woman with the tired eyes, did something then that no protocol required and that I will remember on my own deathbed." She set down her stylus. She came around the end of the counter, slowly, an old woman in the violet sash of the contract court, and she lowered herself, joints protesting, sash dragging on the scorched floor, onto one knee in front of the man who poured coffee. "Shield of the house," she said. "The roll of the save does not lie, and I have spent 40 years writing things that did. Forgive an old recorder one true sentence." She bowed her gray head. "Welcome back from the dead, Corin Renvale. We grieved you." Cale Vorum stood up so fast his stool went over. "This is theater," he said. "A clever counterfeit. The man at the Ember Gate is in the roll of the saved, which means he is dead, which means this is a deserter wearing his burns." He turned to the witnesses, to the protocol, to the thing he understood. "I demand verification. Blood scan on the spot, against the House Archive. If this human is what he claims, the archive will know him. If he's a fraud, the contract proceeds and the Radiant comes home with me. I should have stopped it. I want that recorded too. I was the Crown Brother. I had the authority to stop it, and I did not, because some small and shameful part of me still wanted the man to be a fraud. I had built my whole crossing on his being beneath us. If he was the shield of the Ember Gate, then I had crossed 40 light years to mock a man my own mother had canonized, and I could not yet hold the size of that, so I let Cale have his scan. The younger witness carried the field kit. Every contract party did. In the old days when bloodlines were the currency of marriage and a drop of blood could make or unmake a house. He drew the bead from Ren's burned thumb. Ren gave it without a word, the way he gave everything, calmly, as if it were one more cup poured for one more difficult customer. The kit hummed. It reached up through the orbital relay to the House Archive, the great cold memory of Sale that holds every blood claim and every oath since the founding. And the kit did not say fraud. The kit chimed the 3 rising tones that I had heard exactly twice in my life. Once at my own naming, once at Lizen's, the tones the archive sounds when it matches a blood claim against the roll and finds not a commoner, not an auxiliary, but a sworn shield recorded in the saved. A line of light scrolled up from the kit, a hologram in the dead afternoon air of a freight road cantina, and it read, in the formal hand of the house, Corin Renvale, Shield of the House of Sale, Ember Right, granted in perpetuity, Roll of the Saved, entry 1101, status, deceased. And then, while we watched, the archive did the thing I had never seen an archive do. It corrected itself. The word deceased dissolved and reformed, letter by letter, into living. Because the archive had just been handed a heartbeat that the roll said belonged to a dead man, and the archive does not argue with a heartbeat. The light steadied, the word held, living. The younger witness made a sound in his throat. Cale Vorum looked at the floating word and at the burned hands, and at my sister standing beside her dead and living husband with flour on her wrist, and the cold, beautiful certainty of his face cracked down the middle. "A shield of the house," the older witness said into the silence, and she was still on her knee, outranks a contract contender at any table where the house is named. "There is no marriage to set aside here, contender. There is a marriage the throne is obliged to honor. He is sworn to sail, she is born to sail. The Ember Right binds them tighter than your sashes ever could." I watched my masterstroke turn in my hand and open my own wrist. I had brought the witnesses. I had brought the contender. I had demanded, through Cale, but I had let it stand, the scan. Every instrument I had assembled to humiliate a coffee pourer had instead, one by one, testified to his standing in front of the contract court of the Empire, I had not built a trap for my sister. I had built a coronation for her husband and made myself its master of ceremonies. How, I said. My voice did not sound like mine. How is this? You held the seal 40 seconds past failure. The override scorched the whole throat of the ship. There was no way out of that throat. We were told there was no body because there was nothing left to recover. There was a maintenance crawl, Wren said. Half a meter. A man my size, on fire, doesn't fit through it. I went through it anyway. Left some skin. He turned his hands over slow so I could see what 40 seconds past failure costs. When I came out the far side, the war had moved on and everyone who'd have known my face was on. The boats I cleared halfway to the reach, telling each other the shield was dead. I let them tell it. I'd held a ship together with my body. I didn't have anything left to hold a hull together with. So I found the quietest planet I could and I learned to make coffee, and that was going to be the whole rest of my life. He looked at Liza, and then it wasn't. I have replayed that afternoon more times than I can count. The part I cannot get past is not the scan or the witness on her knee, or even my own ruin. It is that the man told the story flat. No flourish. He recited the most extraordinary act of courage in the modern history of my house, the way he'd told the quorum driver he'd skimmed the oil himself. Because to Wren, they were the same kind of thing. You hold the seal because 1,100 people are behind it. You skim the oil because the man drinking it had a long day. The work is the work. You do it right because someone is depending on it. That was the whole of him, and it was the thing I had crossed the dark unable to see, because I had been raised to believe that worth announces itself, and his never had to. Cale Vorum was a contender of the Vorum, and the Vorum do not lose gracefully, and so he reached for the last lever in the room, which was me. Crown brother, he said, low urgent, the politician finding the politician. Think, a living human in the role of the saved is a wound, not a healing. The factions will tear themselves apart over what he means. The Vorum are not your enemy here, chaos is. Marry your sister to my house, declare the human's reappearance and imposture despite the scan, and the reach stays simple. 2 royal houses, 1 throne, no human war saint complicating the succession. I am handing you stability. The other man is handing you a riddle the empire may not survive. It was, I will admit, a true argument. That is what made it vile. Everything Cale said about the difficulty of a living human war hero was correct. He was offering me the clean lie over the complicated truth, and I had spent my whole life choosing exactly that, because the clean lie is the throne's native tongue. I opened my mouth, and the old laborer, David, the one with the bad back, the one Wren poured for every morning, who had been sitting 2 stools down through all of it nursing a cold cup because he had nowhere better to be, David spoke up, a nobody, a freight road nobody with grease in the creases of his hands. That man, David said, pointing one crooked finger at Wren, pulled my boy out of the reclaimer shaft last winter when it flooded and nobody else would go down because the methane was bad. Held his breath and went down twice. My boy's alive because the coffee man went down twice. He looked at me and at Cale, and he was not afraid of either of us, because real things are not afraid of grand ones. I don't know your empire. I don't know your role. But I know what a man's worth by what he's willing to drown for. And I know that one, the finger again, steady, is worth more than the both of you bowing put together. The cantina was silent. And then the rank-proud quorum driver, the gray-plated one who had barked his order like Wren was furniture, set down his cup. He did not kneel. The quorum do not kneel for anyone. But he stood, and he put his fist flat against his chest plate, the quorum soldier's salute, the one they give only to those who have stood in a breach. I served at the Ember Gate, he said roughly. Lower decks. I was on the 3rd boat. I never knew the face of the man who held the throat so I could reach it. His hard eyes found Wren's. I have poured my insults on you for 19 months. You poured me good coffee every day and never once told me I was drinking it because you didn't die. I am ashamed, Shield. I am ashamed all the way down. 1 witness on her knee, 1 laborer pointing, 1 soldier with his fist on his chest. 3 people in a cantina on a dust world, recognizing in 3 different tongues the same single thing, while a crown brother and a contender stood frozen between them. That is what recognition is, I have come to think, not the scan. Not the archive correcting deceased to living. Those are only machines agreeing with what the heart already knows. Recognition is the moment the room turns, 1 person at a time, toward the thing that was true all along, the thing that needed no scan, that had been pouring coffee in plain sight the whole while. I had crossed 40 light years to be the last man in that cantina to turn. Cale did not leave cleanly, though. The Vorum never leave only once. 2 hours after his launch scorched the road, while the cantina was still humming with what it had witnessed, a second ship came down smaller, unmarked, the kind a faction uses when it does not want its colors seen. 3 men came out of it, not soldiers, worse than soldiers. They wore the soft clothes of contract brokers, and they came into the long drink with their hands open and empty, And the one in front smiled at Ren and said, "Shield, we're not here to fight you, we're here to make you rich." I knew the type at once. When power fails to break a thing, power tries to buy it, and the Vorum had clearly decided that if they could not deny the shield of the Embergate, they would purchase him. "You're a complication for house sale," the broker said, easy reasonable, sitting himself at the counter as if he belonged there. "A living war saint married to the heir. The hall will tear itself apart over what you mean. But you don't have to be sales complication. You could be Vorum's asset. Name the world shield. Name the title. We'll make the man who held the Embergate the richest sworn sword in the Reach, and all you have to do is let the Radiant go home alone, a free widow, to marry where the Empire needs her. You'd be doing the Reach a kindness. You said it yourself, you're the wound. Let us pay you to stop being one." The cantina had gone quiet again, but it was a different quiet than before. Before, it had been the silence of recognition. This was the silence of a room, watching to see whether the thing it had just knelt to was real, or whether it would bend the moment someone showed it a number large enough. Ren poured the broker a coffee. He set it down, and then he did something I had not seen him do in 3 days. He leaned on the counter, both burned hands flat, and he looked at the man for a long moment before he spoke, and there was for the first time something cold underneath the calm. "I held a seal at the Embergate," he said, "with 1,100 people behind it. I didn't ask any of them what they'd pay me. I didn't take account of which of them were rich. I held it because they were behind it. That's the only reason I've ever done anything." He pushed the coffee an inch closer to the broker. "You're asking me to name a price for letting go of a seal with my wife behind it. There isn't one. There was never going to be one. Gold came before you, twice, and it went home cold. You'll go home cold too. Drink your coffee. It's the only honest thing you'll get on this trip." The broker's smile did not falter. They are trained, those men. The smile is the last thing to go. But his eyes did the arithmetic, and the arithmetic came up the same as the enforcers, the same as the customs officers I would meet later, the same as Kale's. He looked around the cantina. He counted the room. And the room, I realized, was already on its feet. Not loudly, not all at once, but Davin had risen, and the quorum driver and Cepha who'd come in off the road, and the cook from the back, and a dozen haulers, the whole freight road congregation of nobodies standing up around the man at the counter for the third time in 3 days, between the shield and the soft-handed men who'd come to buy him. "He told you no," Davin said. "We heard him tell you no. Now you've heard it from the rest of us too. Drink up and go." The brokers went. They left the coffee untouched, which Ren noticed, and which seemed to bother him more than the offer had. "Waste of a good cup," he murmured, and poured it out, and washed it, and set it back on the rack, ready for the next person who came in cold off the road and actually wanted it. I followed the brokers out to their unmarked ship because I was still, in some buried chamber of myself, the crown brother, and I wanted to know the shape of what we'd be facing in the hall. "You'll tell the Vorum he refused," I said. The broker looked at me with something close to professional sympathy. "We'll tell them worse than that, crown brother. We'll tell them he's not for sale, and the town would die for him. That's the report no faction wants. A man who can't be bought and can't be broken, and is loved by the kind of people who don't matter. That's not a complication, that's a banner. Your sister isn't bringing home a husband. She's hang home a thing the whole Reach has been starving for, without a name for it." He climbed into the ship. "We came to buy a wound. We found a flag. The Vorum are going to wish they'd never sent us to look. So I suspect, will you? Though I think you've already figured that out. You've got the look of a man who came to win something and is realizing he's already lost it and is glad." He was not wrong, Shane, and the unmarked ship lifted, and that was the second ship to leave the dust world empty in one afternoon. And the haulers came out to watch this one go too, and again not one of them waved. I went back inside. Ren had already gone back to the ovens. Lysen was wiping the long windows. The cantina had folded its enormous afternoon back into its ordinary evening as if nothing had happened, because to them, I understood, nothing unusual had happened at all. People had come to take the coffee man away. The town had stood up. The town always stood up. It was the most ordinary thing in the world to them, and the most extraordinary thing I had ever seen, and the distance between those two readings was the exact distance I had crossed the dark to close, and had only just that afternoon begun to. So that was the day the dust world emptied 2 ships of the throne's instruments and a third of the Vorum's brokers, and watched all 3 lift off and waved at none of them. But the day was not done with me yet. That evening, after the broker's unmarked ship had cleared the atmosphere, I climbed up to my rented room to do the one thing I still had the authority to do, the thing I had carried across the dark like a sealed order in my coat. I had a warship standing off in the system's far dark, my mother's gift, a sail cruiser with a marine complement aboard, waiting on my word to come down and enforce the imperial decree of dissolution by force if persuasion failed. Persuasion had failed, gold had failed, law had failed, contempt had failed. And the crown brother of Sale still had a cruiser and a decree and the legal right to put Marines on a freight road and take his sister home in irons if he chose to. I sat with the order a long time. I had only to send 3 words on the battle cipher and the cruiser would burn for the surface. The marriage would be law-broken before the cruiser made orbit. Lizen would come home, angry, grieving, but home, and the line would hold against the Vorum, and the human would be left standing in a doorway, watching his wife carried up the gravity well, and the Reach would have its clean widow and its simple succession, and I would have done at last what I was sent to do. I drafted the 3 words. I did not send them, I drafted them again. My finger hovered over the band, and then I went downstairs instead, and found the man wiping a counter that did not need wiping, and I told him the truth, because I had watched too many honest people that day to send Marines down on a lie in the dark. I have a warship in the system, I said. A cruiser. Marines. I can break your marriage by force before morning. I have the decree and the authority and the means. I came down here with all 3 in my coat, and I've kept them there for 3 days, waiting to see if I'd need them. I made myself meet his eyes. I want you to know that. Before whatever we say next, you should know exactly what's standing off in the dark with its guns warm, listening for my word. Ren folded the cloth. He did not look afraid. He looked, if anything, sad, not for himself. I figured you had something, he said. A man like you doesn't cross 40 light years with only a sentence about coffee. Of course you've got a warship. He poured 2 cups. The question was never whether you could take her by force, Crown Brother. You can. You've always been able to. The question is whether you can live in the empire you'd have afterward. The one where the throne of Sale settled its succession by putting Marines on a freight road to drag a grieving heir off the only good thing she'd ever built for herself. You could do it. The decree would hold. And every soul on this road, and every soul those souls ever talk to, would know what the throne is willing to do to its own daughter to keep its politics tidy. Is that the throne you crossed the dark to save? Send the 3 words if it is. I won't stop you. I told you the first hour, nobody's keeping her. I can't stop a warship with a coffee press. But I can ask you to be sure before you become the man who sent it. But Kale was not entirely wrong, and I knew it, and worse, Ren knew it. That is the part of this account I have been circling because it does not flatter anyone. The trap had sprung backward. The man was the shield of the Ember Gate. The room had recognized him. My sister had been right, and I had been a fool. All of that was settled before the launch cleared the atmosphere. But a freight road cantina recognizing a hero does not hold an empire together. Kale was right that the hall runs on power, that the factions were real, that my mother was dying, and that somewhere up the gravity well a contest was coming that no amount of good coffee would settle. I did not send the 3 words. I have never told my mother's captain how close I came, those 3 days, to giving the order. He died still believing the cruiser had been a routine escort. But standing in the empty cantina that night, with the warship still warm in the far dark, and the man pouring me coffee, as if I had not just told him I could end his life by morning, I found I could no longer be the sort of man who sends Marines down on a freight road to keep his politics tidy. So instead we did the thing I had crossed the dark to prevent. We talked, late after Lizen had gone up to bed, with the ovens ticking and the man's hands honest on the counter, because that is what men like him do with the things they cannot fix. You heard Kale, I said, at the grate, before he climbed. I heard him. He's right about the hall. He's right about the hall. Ren folded the cloth. He's wrong about everything else, but he's right about the hall. Power. Factions. The thing your sister keeps trying not to be born to. He poured 2 coffees without asking and set one in front of me, and I understood it was a piece I had not earned and was being given anyway. Sit down, Crown Brother. Let's do the thing you came here to stop us from doing. Let's decide what we owe your mother's empire. Together, at the wrong hour, over the counter, like the people we actually are. He used Lizen's words. I do not think he knew he was doing it. I sat. I drank the coffee. It was, of course, very good. I came to take her home and break your marriage, I said. It cost me to say it plainly. But I had watched 3 strangers tell the truth in that room, and I found I could not be the only liar left in it. I drafted the decree on the voyage. I had the warship standing by to enforce it. My report to my mother was going to call you beneath notice and call her salvageable. I want you to know exactly what kind of man crossed the dark to sit at your counter, because you keep handing me coffee and I don't want to drink it under a false name. Ren was quiet for a moment. I knew most of that, he said. It was on your face the first morning, plain as the scars on mine. You came to take her. He turned his cup. Here's what I want you to understand. I wouldn't have stopped you. You what? If she'd wanted to go that day before any of this, I'd have opened the grate and stood aside. I told you the first hour. Nobody's keeping her. I meant it. A man who'd hold her here against her will isn't worth the throne you're so afraid of. Losing. He looked at me, steady the ember gate in his eyes now that I knew to see it. But she doesn't want to go to be married off to Kael Vorum to settle your factions. That's a different thing than not wanting to go home. You confused the two because it suited you. She loves the Reach. She grieves your mother. She's lain awake every night since you walked in, because she knows, better than you, Crown Brother, that if the Vorum take the throne, the outer worlds bleed. The dust world we're standing on is an outer world. These are her people now. So don't tell me she won't go home. Ask her what home costs and whether she'll pay it. That's a question for her, not a decree for you to draft on a voyage. I had come to extract my sister like a stone from a wound. The man across the counter was telling me she was not a stone, had never been a stone, was a sovereign being making a sovereign choice, and that my entire mission had been the choreography of a man who could not bear to ask his sister a question and risk her answer. What would you do, I asked him, if she goes home? To stand in the hall, to hold the line against the Vorum. What happens to you? The coffee man, who's actually a war saint the Empire grieved. Kael was right, you're a riddle. You're a wound the factions will pick at. You'd be the most dangerous person in any room you walked into, and you don't want a single room like that. You told me so. You've been hiding from halls your whole life. I leaned in. If she goes home, she can't take you. And if she can't take you, she won't go. So your marriage is the thing standing between my sister and the throne that holds the Reach. Kael saw it. That's the real trap. And you walked into it the day you married her. It was the cruelest thing I had said since the line about the coffee, and it was true, and I watched it land on him, and he did not flinch, because he had clearly walked every step of that logic himself in some long night over this same counter. I know, Ren said. You know. I've known since the day she told me her name. He set down the cloth. You think I haven't done this arithmetic? A war saint at her side splits the hall. The factions can't decide whether I'm a threat or a relic, and while they argue, the Vorum move. I'm the wound, Crown Brother. I've always been the wound. The cleanest thing for the Reach would be for the shield of the Ember Gate to stay dead, and for the Radiant of Sail to go home a grieving widow, free to marry whatever house holds the line. You came to break our marriage. I've spent 19 months knowing the Empire might need it broken. The ovens ticked. Out on the road, a hauler shifted gears and was gone. Then why didn't you tell her to go? I said. If you've known all along, if you've done the arithmetic, why are you still pouring her coffee? And Corin Renvale, shield of the House of Sail, the man who held the Ember Gate 40 seconds past failure so 1,100 strangers could live, looked at me across the warped counter of a cantina on a dust world, and gave me the only answer he had, which was the answer of his whole life. Because she didn't ask me to, he said. She asked me to stay. So I stay. I'll hold the seal too, Crown Brother, as long as she's behind it. The day she tells me the Reach needs me to let go, I'll let go, and I'll do it the way I did the last one, all the way, no hand reaching back. But she has to be the one to say it. Not you. Not Kel, not the factions. Her, I don't break for the Empire's convenience. I break for her, or I don't break at all. I have served in the Hall of Sail for 30 years. I have heard the great oaths of the great houses sworn under the throne light by men in ceremonial steel. I have never heard anything that made me feel as small or as suddenly clean as a tired man telling me he would let himself be torn out of his own life, if and only if the woman he loved asked it of him, and not 1 second sooner, and not for any throne in the dark. You're a better man than the throne deserves, I said. No, Ren said. And he almost smiled, the way he'd almost smiled when he handed me my own line back. I'm just a man who knows what he's for. Most people never find out. I found out in a burning ship's throat with my hands on a seal. After that, everything's simple. He stood and gathered the cups, and at the foot of the stairs, he stopped. Get some sleep, Velkar. Tomorrow you ask your sister the real question. And whatever she answers, I'll already be standing wherever she needs me to stand. That's the one thing in all of this that was never in doubt. He went up. I sat alone in the dark cantina with the smell of scorched grain, and for the first time in 40 light years, I did not draft a single decree. I asked her the real question at dawn, the way he'd told me to, while she was burning the first batch of cakes. She did not stop scraping the ruined cakes off the tray. That was her answer before she gave it, that she could hold the throne of an empire in one half of her mind and the morning's burned breakfast in the other, and not drop either. My mother could never have done that. My mother was only ever the throne. I'll go home, Lysen said. I've known I'd have to since Velkar walked through the grate with that stupid sentence in his mouth. The Reach can't fall to the Vorum. The outer worlds can't be a quarry. If standing in the hall holds the line, I'll stand in the hall. She set the tray down, but I go on my terms, brother, not yours. And the first term is that I do not go as a widow. Lysen, you sat with him last night. She looked at me and she knew, the way our blood knows its own. He told you he'd let go if I asked. He told you he's the wound. He's been telling me the same thing for 19 months, in the dark, every time the news from the Reach is bad. The shield of the Ember Gate has been quietly offering to die a second time, for the convenience of my empire for almost 2 years. Her eyes were wet now, but composed the way they always were. My sister has not wept openly since she was a child. It is not in her. And every time I have told him no. Do you know why? Tell me. Because an empire that needs my husband to stay dead to hold itself together is not an empire worth holding. That's not sentiment, Velkar. That's the whole of statecraft, and our mother forgot it, and the Vorum never knew it. A throne that can only stand on a lie about a hero will fall the first time the truth gets loose. So I will not give the hall the clean widow it wants. I will give it the wound it's afraid of. I will walk into the Hall of Sale with the living shield of the Ember Gate at my side, in the role of the saved, blood-scanned, and witnessed, and I will dare the factions to tell the man who saved 1,100 of our people that he should have stayed dead so the politics would be easier. I felt the future turn over in my chest. They'll fight it. Let them fight it. The Vorum want the throne to run on power. Fine. Here is power they cannot scan or sash or set aside. A war saint, the Reach, already grieved, alive, sworn to sail, married to the Radiant, standing in the light where every house can see him. There is not a faction in the hall that can move against Sail without moving against the shield of the Ember Gate. And there is not a soldier in the fleet who served at that gate, and half the fleet served at that gate, brother, who will lift a hand against the man who held the throat. Kale thinks the hall runs on power. I'm going to show the hall what power actually looks like when it's been pouring coffee on a freight road, asking nothing, for 19 months. She picked the leather strip out of her hair and let the silver violet fall loose, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I saw the Radiant in her, the sovereign, fully awake. I'm not bringing home a widow's grief, Velkar. I'm bringing home a living legend the Empire was too cowardly to keep. Let's see the Vorum contest that. I went to find Ren and tell him. He already knew. Of course he already knew. He was at the counter, and he had 3 travel cases packed and waiting by the grate. Small ones. A soldier's worth of belongings, 19 months of a quiet life, reduced to what a man can carry. And he had made coffee for the road. She's decided, I said. She decided last night, he said. She just needed the morning to say it out loud. She does that. Holds a thing till it's solid, then speaks it once. He handed me a case. You're going to carry one. You came across the dark to break this marriage. You can carry its luggage home. He did not ask whether he should go. He did not ask what would happen to him in the hall, whether the factions would tear at him, whether a man who had spent his life fleeing halls could survive a year inside the largest one in the Reach. He had asked himself those questions I knew on his own time over his own counter and settled them. She had said come, so he was coming. The seal was hers to hold or release, and she had not released it, and so he would hold. The freight road found out before we'd finished packing. News travels strangely on a dust world, not on official bands but driver to driver, fuel stop to fuel stop, a thing set over a counter and carried up the road in an ore hauler's cab. By midday, the lot outside the Long Drink was filling with vehicles, haulers who had no cargo to move and had come anyway, parked in the dust with their engines ticking, because the coffee man was leaving, and they did not have a ceremony for that and did not know what else to do but come and stand near. And then, because the Reach has never done sending instruments, one more came. Not a ship this time. A message relayed down through the depot's old comm rig, from the orbital ring, a final offer from someone up the gravity well who had heard already what was coming. It was addressed to Ren, and the depot master brought it down himself on foot because he did not trust it to a screen. It offered the shield a clean exit. Stay on the dust world, keep the cantina, accept a quiet pension and a sealed record, and let the Radiant go home alone. No one need ever know the saint had lived. The wound need never reach the hall. A whole life, paid for, in exchange for staying invisible one more time. Ren read it standing in the lot, with 30 haulers watching, and the depot master watching, and Lizen watching from the doorway with the boy's stone in her fist. He read it all the way through, the way he read everything. Then he handed it back to the depot master and said, loud enough for the lot to hear, tell them I've been invisible 11 years. I was good at it. But she asked me to come stand in the light, and I'd sooner stand in the light and be a wound than hide in the dark and be comfortable. There's no pension large enough to buy a man out of where his wife needs him. He looked at the haulers, the whole silent ticking lot of them. Besides, these people already know who I am. They've known for years. They just never needed me to say it. I'm not going to start lying to a hall to keep a thing quiet that a freight road figured out on its own. The lot did not cheer. That is not what those people do. But the quorum driver climbed up onto the bed of his hauler, slow, and put his fist to his chest plate and held it there, and one by one, down the whole dusty lot, the drivers who'd served, And there were more of them than I'd have guessed. The wars take their soldiers from the freight roads first. Climbed up and did the same, fist to chest, 30 hard hands over 30 hard hearts. A salute the size of a battlefield given in a cantina parking lot to a man who poured coffee. And I stood in the middle of it, the crown brother of Sale, and understood that I had crossed the dark to recruit my sister back to a hall that had never once produced a moment like the one I was standing in. We closed the long drink that afternoon. Lysen walked the room one last time, her hand trailing along the warped counter, and the old laborer Davin came in with his boy. The boy Ren had gone down the reclaimer shaft twice to pull out, and the boy gave Lysen a flat. Riverstone he'd polished, the only thing he had, and Lysen took it as if it were a crown jewel, and put it in her pocket, and I watched the radiant of Sale treat a freight road child's polished stone with more genuine reverence than I had ever seen her treat the regalia of 3 sovereign houses. "Who'll make the coffee now?" David asked Ren, and his voice cracked on it. "You will," Ren said. "I've been showing you the oil skim for a year. You thought I was just talking." He clasped the old man's grease-creased hand in both his burned ones. "Run it honest, David. That's the whole secret. There isn't another one. The quorum driver was there too, the rank-proud one, and he had brought, of all things, a gift, a battered fleet-issue coffee press, the kind the lower decks used during the war, and he pressed it on Ren without a word, fist to chest plate, soldier to shield. Ren took it, he understood it. So did I by then. We lifted off the dust world at sundown. From the launch window, I watched the long drink shrink to a speck of light on the dark freight road, the only lit window for 100 kilometers. And I thought about the 19 months a war saint had spent making that one window honest, asking nothing, recognized by no one, and I understood that I had been wrong about the entire architecture of worth. I had believed worth was a thing you announced from a height. He had spent 2 years proving it was a thing you poured, one honest cup at a time, for whoever came in cold off the road. The voyage home took 11 days. I spent them rewriting my report to my mother. The first draft had called him beneath notice. The final draft I read aloud to no one, alone in my cabin to be sure I could say it without my voice breaking, because I knew I would have to say it in the hall, and the hall does not forgive a broken voice. The final draft began. The man at the Ember Gate did not die. He has been keeping a light on a freight road, married to your daughter, asking nothing. I crossed the dark to break them, and instead I found the only thing the throne of Sale has left that is worth defending. Mother, when you see him, stand. I know you cannot rise from the bed easily now. Have them lift you. The shield of the Ember Gate has come home, and the House of Sale will stand for him, beginning with its crown brother, who was the last in a dusty cantina to understand what the lowest laborer there knew at a glance. I did not soften it. I had spent 40 years softening things. It was done. The Vorum tried to end it before we ever reached the hall. It happened at the transit ring above the home world, in the long gray hour when a ship comes off its jump coils and the passengers wait to be cleared down to the surface. We were in the ring's outer concourse, the 3 of us and the old recorder who had insisted on traveling with us. Ren, carrying the cases, Lysen with the boy's polished stone in her pocket, when a customs officer in Vorum Gray stepped into our path and told us, with a smooth bureaucrat's regret, that the humans' documents were flagged. Imposture suspected. The shield of the Ember Gate was deceased, the records were clear, and a man claiming a dead saint standing would be detained pending verification, which could take a season, which was of course the point. Hold the wound off the floor of the hall long enough for the succession to settle, and the wound need never be addressed at all. Lysen went very still, which is how I have learned to know my sister is most dangerous. On whose authority, she said. Transit safety, radiant. The officer did not quite meet her eyes. Purely procedural, the human will be comfortable. He'll be released the moment the verification clears. In a season. These things take the time they take. And here is the thing about Ren that I had stopped being surprised by and had started instead. To lean on the way you lean on a wall you trust. He did not argue. He did not invoke his ember right or demand a scan or raise his voice. He set the cases down neatly so they would not fall. And he held out his wrists for the binders, calm as a man waiting for his coffee to cool, because if the procedure wanted a body to hold, he would give it a body and let the procedure choke on what it was holding. "I'll go," he said, "if that's the law. I've never had much use for arguing with law. But you should send word ahead to whoever you answer to, officer, and tell them what you've detained. Tell them you've put the man who held the throat of the flagship at the Ember Gate in a transit cell on the word of a record that hasn't met his blood yet. Tell them the fleet's coming down to the hall this week, the descendant crews, the ones whose parents reached the boats. Tell them you'll be explaining to those crews why you held the man who held the seal." He let his wrists stay out. "I'll wait in the cell while you tell them. I'm good at waiting." The customs officer hesitated. You could see the arithmetic move behind his gray face. The same arithmetic the enforcers had done on the freight road, the same arithmetic the contender had done in the cantina, the calculation of a man realizing the thing in front of him is heavier than the orders. In his hand. It was the old recorder who finished it. She had her field kit out before the officer found his answer, the same kit, and she did not throw its light up for a crowd this time. There was no crowd. Only the gray concourse and a handful of travelers pretending not to watch. She simply pressed the reader to the back of Wren's still outheld wrist, where the burns were, and let it reach up through the ring's relay to the archive, and the kit chimed its 3 rising tones into the quiet concourse, and the light unspooled, and the words stood in the air between the customs officer and the man he meant to detain, living. "You may flag a record, officer," the old woman said. "You may not flag a heartbeat. The archive has already met his blood. It met it on a dust world, and it corrected itself, and it has just met it again, and it has not changed its mind. Detain him now, and you are not holding a suspected imposture. You are holding a sworn shield of the House of Sale against the testimony of the House's own archive, in the House's own transit ring, the week of the succession." She lowered the kit. "I have written 40 years of documents in this empire. I know exactly which ones get a man's career ended. Would you like me to write this one?" The binders never closed. The officer stepped aside. He stepped aside the way the enforcers had taken their writ home, the way Cale had walked the long floor alone. The step of someone who has met an immovable thing and chosen, wisely, not to be the one it moves through. Wren gathered the cases back up. He thanked the officer, which undid the man more thoroughly than any threat could have, and we went down to the surface. "You'd have let them put you in a cell," I said, on the descent, "for a season. You'd have just waited." "It's only a season," Wren said. "I waited 11 years in a cantina for nothing in particular. I can wait a season in a cell for her." He looked out the descent window at the homeworld coming up, the great cities, the dome of the hall just visible through the cloud, the empire that had grieved him and was about to have to look at him alive. "The trick isn't fighting the cell, Velkar. The trick is being the kind of thing they regret holding. Let the law do its worst. If you're the real thing, the law gets embarrassed long before you do. Gold couldn't move me, a writ couldn't move me, a cell can't move me. They keep reaching for instruments. I'm not a thing instruments work on. Neither's your sister. That's why she married me. We recognized it in each other across a counter, 2 people the Empire's tools slide right off of." He almost smiled. "Took your whole family 40 light years and 3 approaches to find out what we knew in an afternoon." I did not answer. There was nothing to answer. He was right, and I had spent my life being an instrument, and I was only now, on a descent shuttle above my dying mother's empire, beginning to understand that there are people in the dark the throne cannot reach with any tool it owns, and that those people and not the tools are the only thing a throne is ever truly worth holding for. The Hall of Sale was already at war with itself when we arrived. You could feel it from the orbital ring. My mother's dying had loosened every binding in the reach, and the factions had spent the season I'd been gone sharpening themselves against each other. The Vorum had moved fast. Cale's launch had reached the ring days before ours, and they had moved exactly as he'd promised me they would. They had named the living shield of the Ember Gate an imposture, a deserter wearing a dead saint's burns, a fraud cooked up by a desperate sale to manufacture legitimacy. They had a counter-scan ready to dispute. They had witnesses bought. They had turned my own masterstroke against me a second time, because that is what the Vorum do. They take the truth you found and they bury it, under enough procedure to suffocate it. The hall, when we entered it, was a sea of houses, every faction in its colors, the great throne light pouring down from the dome onto the empty seat of Sale, because my mother could no longer climb to it. She had been carried in on a litter and set at its foot, small and gray and burning with the last of herself, and the houses had been shouting at each other across her dying body for an hour before we came through the doors. Lizen walked in first. She had not dressed as the Radiant. That was the thing none of them expected. She wore traveling clothes, the plain dark of the freight road, the leather strip back in her hair, and she walked the long floor of the Hall of Sale past 300 years of her own ancestors carved in pillars, and the shouting died around her like a tide going out, because there is a kind of authority that ceremony can only imitate, and my sister had learned it pouring coffee on a dust world, and she carried it into that hall and it silenced a war. Wren walked behind her, not beside. Behind and to the left, the place of the sworn shield, the place his ember right entitled him to, and not Ventnor out of it, and he walked it the way he'd cross the cantina floor every morning, weight balanced, hands easy, looking at no one and missing nothing. He wore no medals. He had none. He wore a plain dark coat, and the fleet issue coffee press was, I knew, in the case he carried, because he would not leave the Quorum's gift behind. And there was something in a war saint, carrying a freight road coffee press into the hall of sale that I have never been able to put into words. The first to move against them was old Lord Tessick of the Hollow March, a great house elder who had sided with the Vorum because the Vorum had promised him the outer trade lanes, and who saw at once that a kneeling hall would cost him those lanes. He stepped into the floor before Lizen could reach the throne, and he did the cruelest thing a man can do in that hall. He laughed, the same laugh I had laughed in the cantina, the laugh of a man who believes he has already won. The Radiant of Sale, Tessick said, comes home in a freight driver's coat, trailing a serving man, and expects the houses to bend. I knew your grandmother, girl. She'd have died before she let the throne be seen beside a, what is it the Vorum call him, a coffee pourer. He turned to the houses, playing the room the way I would once have played it. We are asked to stake the succession of the Reach on a dead man's burns and a smitten heir's word. I say the Hollow March stakes nothing on a counterfeit saint. Let the human prove he is what he claims, here now, or let him be removed with the rest of the heir's bad judgment. It should have been a killing blow. It was the exact blow I myself had carried across the dark, and I watched my sister receive it in her freight driver's coat in front of 300 houses, with her dying mother at the foot of the throne, and she did not flinch because she had received worse, alone, in a cellar that smelled of reclaimer grease 100 times over. Prove it then, Lizen said. By all means, Lord Tessick, let's prove it. You wanted power staked in the open. I've brought it witness. Show the hall what the archive said when it met his blood. Cale Vorum was waiting at the foot of the throne, in full ceremonial gray and gold, and he had the counterscan in his hand, and he had the procedure ready, and he opened his mouth to drown the truth. Houses of the Reach, Cale began. You have been deceived. This human is on your knees. It was not Lizen who said it. It was not me. It was the old gray-skinned binding witness, the recorder from the cantina who had traveled the whole way home in steerage on her own coin because she would not let the roll of the save be made a liar in the hall of sale while she still drew breath. She came forward through the houses, an old woman in a violet sash, and she held up the field kit, the same kit with the recording still live inside it, and she threw its light up into the great throne light of the dome so that every house in the hall could read it. Corin Ren Vale, Shield of the House of Sale, Ember Right Grant in Perpetuity, Roll of the Saved, Entry 1101, Status Living. The archive does not argue with a heartbeat, she said, and her old voice carried to the dome. It said deceased for 11 years. It corrected itself the instant his blood touched the kit, because the roll of the saved cannot hold a lie, and the contract court cannot witness one. I have written 40 years of comfortable falsehoods in this hall. I will not write another. That man held the throat of your flagship 40 seconds past failure so 1,100 of your sons and daughters could reach the boats. He is not an imposture. He is the most honest thing that has walked this floor in my lifetime, and I have watched every liar of 3 generations cross it. She lowered herself, joints cracking, onto her knee, exactly as she had in the cantina. On your knees, houses of the Reach. The shield of the Ember Gate is not dead. We grieved a man who was busy living. Beg his pardon. The hall did not move. 300 nobles, every faction, frozen between the Vorum's procedure and an old recorder on her knee. And then the fleet decided it. Because Lizen had been right about the fleet. Half the fleet had served at the Ember Gate, and the honor guard ringing the hall that day was drawn from the flagship's own descendant crews, the sons and daughters of the 1,100 who reached the boats. And one of them, a young guard captain at the base of the throne, who could not have been more than a child when his parents were carried to safety through a throat one man held with his body. That young captain looked up at the floating word living and looked at the plain dark coat and the burned hands, and his face did the thing the Corum driver's face had done in the cantina, except 1,000 times over, because this was not insult curdling into shame. This was a son meeting the reason he had ever been born. He went down on one knee. Then his whole guard went down. Then the descendant crews ringing the hall went down, rank by rank, armor ringing on the ancient stone, and it spread inward through the houses the way the recognition had spread through the cantina, one at a time, the lesser houses first, and then the greater, until the only people standing in the hall of sale were Cale Vorum with his useless counterscan and the crown brother who had crossed the dark to mock the man the whole empire was now kneeling to. I knelt too, last again, but I knelt. And my mother, the empress, dying, who had not risen from her litter in 40 days, my mother put out one gray hand and gripped the arm of the man, carrying her, and she said in a voice like dry paper, "Lift me." They lifted her. The Empress of the Reach, with the last strength in her body, stood at the foot of her own throne, while 300 houses knelt around her, and she looked at the human her daughter had married, the saint she had canonized 11 years ago, believing him safely dead, and she did the one thing an empress is never required to do for anyone. She inclined her head. The throne of sail bowed to the shield of the ember gate. I wrote your name in the roll myself, she whispered, and the hall was silent enough to hear it. With my own hand, I thought I was writing an epitaph. I have never in my life been so glad to have been wrong. Her dying eyes found her daughter. You brought him home. He was never lost, Mother, Lysen said. He was just pouring coffee where no one important was looking. I went and looked. Kale Vorum did not kneel. He stood at the foot of a bowing empire with his counterscan dead in his hand, and I will give him this much. He understood, finally, that he had lost, and he did not pretend otherwise. The Vorum do not lose gracefully, but they do recognize a closed door. He let the scan fall to the stone. It cracked. No one looked at it. You think this holds, he said, to the kneeling hall, to all of it. A dead man come back in a sentimental court. The throne runs on power. It always has. But his voice had lost its certainty because he was a contender shouting at 300 bent backs, and even the Vorum cannot make that look like strength. It was Ren who answered him. The first words he had spoken since entering the hall, he spoke them quietly, the way he'd told the quorum driver about the oil, and the silence carried them to the dome. You're right, Ren said. The throne runs on power. I held a ship's containment shut with my hands for 40 seconds past failure, contender. I know exactly what power is. It's the willingness to stand in the throat of a thing that's killing you because someone behind you needs the seal held one more second. He looked at the kneeling fleet, the descendant crews, the sons and daughters of the boats he'd cleared. That's the only power that ever held an empire together, not the scan, not the sash. The seal held one more second by someone who asked for nothing. The Reach is full of that power. It's pouring coffee on every freight road you've never bothered to land on. You couldn't find it because you were looking up. It was always down. Oz was the lowest man in the room who knew. His eyes came to me when he said that, just for a moment, not cruelly. Then back to Kale. Contest the marriage if you like. But you'll be contesting the only thing in this hall that's actually worth a throne. I don't think the fleet will let you. I don't think they'll ever let you again. Kale Vorum looked at the fleet. The fleet looked back at him, on its knees, fist to chest plate, and there was not a thing in all his procedure that could stand against it. He turned, and he walked the long floor out of the Hall of Sail, alone, past the carved ancestors, and the great doors closed behind him, and that was the end of the Vorum contest for the throne, ended not by a warship or a decree, but by a man who would not be made to feel small over coffee, and a woman who went and looked where no one important was looking, and an old recorder who chose one true sentence at the end of a lifetime of lies. My mother died 11 days later. She died having named the succession, and she named it cleanly, and the Vorum could not move against it, because the fleet had already chosen its side in the hall, and the fleet does not unchoose. The Radiant of Sail would hold the throne. And at her side, in the roll of the saved, sworn shield of the house, would stand the man the Empire had grieved, and the dust world had known all along. I was there at the end, so was Lysen, so was Ren. My mother in her last clear hour asked for him. Not for me, her crown brother, her instrument of 40 years, for the coffee man. And he came and sat by the imperial deathbed the way he'd sat across the cantina counter from me, easy, weight balanced, hands folded. And my mother looked at him with the last of her sight, and she said, "Will you hold the seal when I'm gone? When the throat of it heats up and the factions push, and my daughter is alone in the light of that dome, will you hold it for her?" "As long as she's behind it," Ren said. "All the way, no hand reaching back." "That's the only oath worth swearing," my mother whispered. "I had a hall full of men in steel swear me grand ones. None of them meant it the way you just did." She closed her eyes. "I'm glad I was wrong about you. I'm glad of so little at the end. I'm glad of that." She did not speak again. The season of mourning was not quiet. I will not pretend the hall healed in an afternoon's kneeling. The Vorum made one last move. They always make one last move, and it came, as the cruelest things do, dressed as concern. Lord Tessic of the Hollow March, who had laughed at my sister on the floor of the hall, and then been made to kneel with the rest, came to me privately in the gray weeks after my mother's death, the way men come to you when they have lost the open fight and want to win the quiet. "A war saint consort splits the hall," he said, reasonable, sorrowful. The very argument Kale had made over coffee and the brokers had made with gold. "I bend the knee to the man, crown brother, I do. But sentiment crowned your sister, and sentiment will not hold the trade lanes when the outer worlds test her. Let the human have his honors. Let him have a title, an estate, a quiet place at her side, but keep him off the floor of governance. A coffee pourer cannot sit in the councils of the Reach. Even the fleet would grant me that. Give me that one thing." And the Hollow March stands with sail and the lanes hold. It was the last lever, the last instrument, and I, who had once been the throne's sharpest, recognized it for exactly what it was, because I had spent 40 years building levers just like it. He was offering to let the Reach kneel to the man in public and bury him in private, to recognize the shield with one hand and geld the recognition with the other. I told Tessic no. I told him with a flatness I had learned from a man wiping a counter on a dust world. He held a seal 40 seconds past failure for 1,100 strangers, Tessic. You think he can't sit in a council? He's the only one of us who's proven he'll hold a thing past the point it costs him. Put him off the floor, and you put off the floor the one true thing this hall has produced in a generation. The Hollow March will stand with Sale because the fleet will make it stand, and because I, the Crown Brother, will remember which lords came to me in the gray weeks trying to bury a war saint in honors. Stand or don't. But the man sits where his wife seats him, and she'll seat him in the light. Tessic stood. He bent the knee, the deep one this time, the one protocol does not require, and I understood that he had not really come to win. He had come to find out whether the throne had changed, whether the new reign would run on levers or on something else, and I had answered him, and the answer had settled him the way good coffee settled the quorum driver. The Hollow March stood with Sale, the lanes held, and the last of the Vorum contest dissolved not in battle but in the slow recognition, lord by lord, that the Empire had found something it would not trade away. We crowned Lysen under the dome a season later, when the morning was done, and the hall was full, and the fleet lined every wall. I stood where the Crown Brother stands at the right of the throne, and I watched my sister take the weight of the Reach onto her shoulders without flinching because she had been carrying heavier things, an empire and a burned breakfast in the same morning, for years, where no one important was looking. And when the crown was set, and the houses cry, the old cry, Lysen did not turn to receive the Reach. She turned to the place of the sworn shield, behind her and to the left, where her husband stood in a plain dark coat with no medals, and she held out her flower-collused hand. She still has the calluses. She says she earned them and will not lose them. And she drew him up beside the throne, into the light, in front of 300 houses and half the fleet, into the one place the Vorum had said a coffee man could never stand. Bow before him, she said, not loud. She did not need to be loud. Not for the war. He'd hate that, and he's heard enough of it. Bow before the man who held a seal he was never thanked for, and poured coffee no one important drank, and asked the Empire for nothing for 11 years, while you grieved a statue and never once looked at a freight road. Her eyes were wet and composed and full of the whole of it. I went and looked. That's all I ever did that was worth a throne. I went and looked at the lowest light on the darkest road, and I found the best man in the Reach pouring coffee in it, asking nothing, bow before him. I did 19 months ago in an apron, and I have never once been sorry. The hall bowed. And Corin Ren Vale, shield of the House of Sale, the coffee man, the wound that turned out to be the cure, leaned to my sister, and he did not kiss her, and he did not make a speech. He only said, low so that I, standing nearest, was the only other soul who heard it. I'd have held the seal anyway. You know that. You didn't have to give me the light. I know, Lysen said. That's exactly why you get it. I am Velker Duran Sale. I crossed 40 light years to break a marriage and mock a man who poured coffee for a living. And I came home the last man in the Reach to kneel, behind an old recorder and a grease-handed laborer and a rank-proud driver and a fleet of grateful sons. I have served the throne of Sale for 30 years. I have never seen it stronger than the day it stopped running on power and started running on a man who knew what he was for and held the seal and asked for nothing and was finally, in the light where the whole Reach could see him. He still makes the coffee. In the imperial kitchens every morning with his own burned hands, the fleet issue pressed the quorum gave him. The court thought it was eccentric at first. Now there is a line. Soldiers, mostly. The ones who were on the boats, and their children, and their children's children, coming to take a cup from the hand that held the throat. He learns their names. He remembers them. He skims the oil himself. He pours coffee for a living. I said it once as the cruelest thing I knew. I have come to understand it is the truest thing anyone has ever said about a great man.